Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of a horror thriller films from 2010, titled The Ward. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The year is 1966, a dark and ominous atmosphere fills the North Bend Psychiatric Hospital. Amidst the rough stormy night, some footsteps are heard in the hospital's dark alley, moving toward a room, and then stopping at a door labeled Tammy. Inside is a lady named Tammy, who is seemingly terrified by the unseen entity on the door. Suddenly, the creature finds its way inside, and instantly chokes her and finishes her off. The movie then cuts to a new scene the following day, as a police car is in pursuit of a missing lady named Kristen, who is seen hiding in the woods. She manages to dodge the officers, and makes her way to an abandoned farmhouse. It's unclear why the girl sets the house on fire, but the blaze quickly spreads and consumes the house. The police see the burning house and Kristen, who just sits there and watches the flames. After that, the troubled girl is apprehended by the officers. However, they don't take her in, but rather send her to a psychiatric hospital we see in the beginning of the movie, where she is deemed to have escaped. There, a nurse named Roy picks her up and leads way to her to the ward, a restricted area, and her new home. She is then taken to a room by Nurse Lund, where she notices that other patients are observing her. Coincidentally, she is led to the room previously occupied by Tammy, and the nurse quickly replaces Tammy's name with Kristen. Nurse Lund then shows her in, and puts her to bed before locking her up for the night. As she goes to bed, she has a faint recollection of a young girl chained up in a dark room. The recollection, however, doesn't reveal much as she falls asleep midway. Later in the night, something strange happens as Kristen's blanket is mysteriously dragged away. Sometime after, when she wakes up, she starts looking for her blanket. She then bumps into some beads that contain certain letters, but doesn't make much out of it. At daybreak, Kristen is woken up by a doctor named Stringer, alongside the nurse. She raises the night's unusual occurrence, but the duo brushes it off, saying the door was locked. Nurse Lund then gives her some pills, but she promptly tosses it on the floor and crushes them with her feet. As soon as she steps outside, all the patients have their eyes on the new girl. Among them is Zoe, who always seems to be acting like a little kid. Another is Emily, and she's the first to approach Kristen. Emily is curious to know if Kristen is here to save them. Iris interrupts them, and requests for Emily to stop scaring Kristen. Another girl, Sarah, quickly makes herself known as the mean girl of the group. Up next, the therapist invites her to his office, when she demands to know the reason for her being held up on the premise. Dr. Stringer doesn't answer her question, but instead inquires about her memories. Surprisingly, Kristen doesn't seem to recall anything beyond the fire incident at the farmhouse. Stringer shows her a picture of her palm, which has the address of the farmhouse written on it, but Kristen can't recall where she got the address, or why she set the home on fire. Stressed and depressed, she points toward a one-way mirror, and behind it is a camera recording them. When it's time for Kristen's medication, Roy will watch to see that she takes them. As soon as he leaves, Kristen reaches for the tool she stole from Dr. Stringer's desk, and opens the door by picking the lock. Kristen then heads straight to the main door. Unfortunately, as she attempts to open it, Roy restrains her. In the end, he takes her back to her room. Later that night, the weather starts changing for the worse, and once more, the loud footsteps are heard in the alley. A disfigured woman stares at Kristen through a watch window for a while, before getting away. On the next day, Iris comes to Kristen and says that she wants to draw her. Kristen agrees to this, while the couple is seen keeping a close watch on them alongside Dr. Stringer from his window. Kristen is curious to know who they are, and her friends say that they are the sad people, always look sad. Kristen then tells them about the female figure she saw last night, but they neither deny nor confirm what Kristen saw. In the next cut, the group is back indoors with everyone jazzing to some music, including the silent kiddish Zoe. Their joy is however cut short by power disturbances resulting from bad weather. As expected, the ghost-like figure shows up amidst the light flickers, causing terror among them. But then after a while, power is regained and the ghost disappears. They seem relieved, oblivious to the fact that this is just the beginning of a long-run torture. Later, when Kristen is taking a bath, the ghost shows up in the bathroom and takes hold of her, almost choking her to death. Nurse Lund comes to her rescue, but only thinks she is hallucinating. Kristen then tells her something was in there and it was not human, but Nurse Lund doesn't believe her, and gives an injection to calm her down. When she regains consciousness, she is in an operating room, all tied up. Dr. Stringer then shows up and puts a bit in her mouth, saying that the medications are not working as he'd hoped. The doctor orders for electroconvulsive therapy to make her docile. This calms her down and she is carried to her room for the night. The following morning, all the girls have a session with Dr. Stringer. Emily, looking like the Joker, asks what they did to Kristen, and Stringer simply says that it was an unscheduled therapy. The situation reminds Emily of Tammy, who disappeared and never came back. Hearing this, Kristen asks who is Tammy, to which Iris replies that Tammy was the last who left the ward. Just then, Stringer puts an end to their conversation. After the session, Emily attempts to make Kristen feel better. Iris then happily comes in to announce that she'll have her final session with Stringer. Iris thinks she is cured, even though Stringer didn't say he would release her. During her session, Dr. Stringer goes through her drawings and acknowledges her positive progress over time. However, he stops to question her when he bumps into a drawing of a dark figure. It becomes apparent that all the inmates might have come across it. After some hesitation, Dr. Stringer decides to put her through a series of tests to ensure that she is completely cured. He uses a metronome to induce hypnotherapy, while reminding her of an event 10 years back. Afterwards, Stringer says that Iris is sleeping in his office, but when the nurse comes in, she is nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, at the same time, we see Iris chained on a wheelchair rolling through the alley. When she looks up to see who's pushing her, she screams in fear. The entity leads her into a room, where it eliminates her by stabbing her in the eye. Back in the ward, Kristen grows suspicious of the situation as Iris fails to exit the office. She asks Lund where Iris is, but the nurse ignores her and orders them to sleep. At breakfast, Kristen is convinced that something fishy is going on, so she tries seeking info about Iris, but no one seems to mind her. On entering her room, she is surprised to find Iris's sketchpad there. Kristen is convinced that Iris could have left with it if she was discharged from the ward. As she goes through it, she finds a nice picture of a girl named Alice. But on the next page, she finds the ghost's drawing with the name Alice Hudson alongside it. She instantly recalls the beads she'd collected in her room earlier on. On rearranging them, they make up the name Alice, insinuating she was once an inmate. With her findings, she faces the doctor demanding to know what's going on in the hospital. The doctor, however, dismisses her sentiments, saying she must solve the mystery on her own. She then accosts her fellow inmates to know the truth about Alice, but they don't answer and their faces are filled with guilt. Emily is terrified, and finally says that Alice was an inmate who was later discharged. However, it's clear from her body language she is hiding the truth. Kristen then states that their only way out of the ordeal is to escape, otherwise death is assured if they stay for long. Emily agrees to join her, while Sarah and Zoe keep off the plan. At night, Kristen uses the metal piece she retrieved from the doctor's office to unlock her door, and she picks Emily up. The duo set out to find Iris, and escape from the premise. They manage to dodge several members of staff as they wander through the vast hospital. Once they reach the morgue, they hear someone approaching, so they decide to hide for a while. When Kristen finally steps out of the hideout, she doesn't find Emily around. Suddenly, she hears someone banging one of the morgue cabinets. Suspecting they might have locked her in there, she goes ahead to open it. All of a sudden, she is greeted by the ghost's hand, which terrifies her, prompting her to run upstairs. As she approaches the front door, she hears someone calling the name Alice. And when she turns, the ghost appears again. She passes out, and the last person she sees is Roy. The next morning, she wakes up in her room, and is in severe pain in her head. She then joins the rest while trying to comprehend yesterday's events. Sarah then questions Kristen about what happened last night. Kristen says they didn't find Iris, and Sarah blames their failure on Emily. Later, Sarah leaves them all, holding a pocket mirror in her hand, right when she sees the ghost behind her. As she looks out the door, Alice grabs her from behind. We then see them in the surgery room. Surprisingly, Sarah seems aware of its identity, and calls it out by its name Alice. Sarah pleads with Alice not to harm her, saying it was not her idea to do what they did to her. The ghost then administers excess electroshock which eliminates Sarah shortly. The excess current consumed by the machine causes flickering of the lights in the hospital. Kristen instantly connects the dots, and calls out for Sarah to no avail. At this point, Zoe can't help but fall to her knees and cry, and Kristen finally sees that Zoe's toy has Alice's initials written on it. Therefore, Zoe lets the cat out of the bag, and reveals that Sarah and the other girls did something to Alice. According to Zoe, Alice was mean to them and often hurt them all. Then Tammy came up with the idea of putting it to an end. Zoe lured Alice into Tammy's room, where everyone was waiting to gang up on her. They murdered her together, and now Alice is back for revenge. However, Kristen is left wondering why Alice attacks her, yet she wasn't among those who did her bad. At this point, Emily is shaken and runs away from them, and the duo follows her. Emily plans to commit the unthinkable before Alice gets to her, despite pleas from Kristen not to do it. They are cut short when Alice suddenly appears, and helps Emily finish her assignment. The remaining duo is terrified, and prompted to hatch an escape plan at the moment. Kristen holds Zoe as a pretense hostage, and goes past the staff easily. However, their plan hit the wall when they enter the elevator. Kristen pulls a last-minute plan and bites her captor, but Stringer catches her, and Nurse Lunt injects her with drugs. Later on, we see her in her room in a straitjacket. She tries to free herself, and finally manages to do it. When Nurse Lunt comes to check on her at night, she knocks her unconscious. This time, she makes sure to knock Roy out as well. She then starts leaving there with Zoe, heading straight to the main door. After a long run from the staff, they finally get to a dumbwaiter which can help them to the upper floors. Since it's meant to carry light loads, Zoe is forced to go first due to its limited capacity. But unfortunately for Zoe, Ghost Alice is readily waiting for her and finishes her off. The dumbwaiter then gets back, and Kristen gets to the upper floor. She is however shocked to find Zoe missing, and only sees a trail of blood which she carefully follows. Her curiosity lands her in trouble as Alice appears, and gets hold of her. Alice is super strong and throws her around easily, and almost overwhelms her. Luckily, Kristen finds a fire axe which she uses to annihilate her, and leaves her severely wounded. She then runs off, and shortly finds herself in Dr. Stringer's office. There she finds Alice's file, which has each of the girls' names, including Kristen's. Dr. Stringer arrives shortly, and Kristen demands to know the utter truth this time round. Here comes the shocking truth. The doctor starts off with some scary revelation about her real name being Alice. She is perplexed by this as she can't wrap up it in her head. The doctor then reveals that Kristen is actually one of many personalities of her who was kidnapped at age 11, 8 years earlier, and left chained for 2 months in the basement of the same farmhouse she burned down. So that she could get through the trauma, she developed multiple personality disorders, creating each of the girls from the ward with a different personality over time. But the personalities grew unpredictable and dominant, which overwhelmed and murdered Alice's real personality. The hospital came close to curing her over the course of 7 years, but a new personality appeared, Kristen. Kristen was a wild card, and Alice created her to protect her personalities, so she wouldn't have to deal with her past trauma. But in the end, they were all destroyed just as Stringer planned, and Kristen is next. Dr. Stringer then uses hypnotherapy to help Kristen recall her past, instantly bringing the ghost Alice back to fight for her position. Alice holds Kristen and jumps out through the window. Here we can see that Alice has finally conquered other personalities, and retrieved her real self. Afterwards, the sad people we saw in the previous scene come to see her, and we find out that they are Alice's parents. Stringer asks if she finally remembers what happened to her, and Alice says that she does, and that she never has to run away from her traumas again. At the end of the movie, Alice packs her belongings as she prepares to leave the hospital. But when she opens the medicine cabinet above her sink. Okay guys, that's all the recap of the Ward 2010. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.